are taking a look at one of the chapters of ITOE, or most uncommonly known as Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. And this one deals with axiomatic concepts. So, James, beforehand, could you tell me a bit more about this essay, and how could my life be improved if I read this essay? Maybe it's a bit dry, and the audience will have that
Well, yeah,
question.
this really is the most abstract and technical issue in philosophy, or at least among the most abstract and technical issues in philosophy, in epistemology, the theory of knowledge, that one can really get at. But I love your question, asked like a true objectivist. How will this practically affect my life? What is the cash value here? So first, I have to sell you on the idea of epistemology, that subject of philosophy itself. According to objectivism, reason is our only means of knowledge beyond the perceptual level. It is in the form of concepts, propositions, and theories that human knowledge really has its great power. And no arbitrary means, whether it's, horoscopes or Kant's categorical imperative, no non-rational means can get us at the truth. And if that's the case, if reason is our basic tool of cognition, our only way of knowing beyond the perceptual level, then, according to Ayn Rand, is our basic means of survival. All of our knowledge, scientific, technological, moral, is what's right and wrong, what should be unlawful and not lawful. All of those evaluations and concepts depend on the validity of our concepts, depend upon the validity of the ideas that we use when we construct our theories about the way things should be. All of our knowledge, life and death knowledge, it depends on it. So reason is our basic means of knowing, our only means of knowing beyond the perceptual. It's our basic means of survival, therefore. And therefore, being confident in our knowledge is absolutely critical to a happy and successful life. Furthermore, let me sell you on this book in particular. This is Ayn Rand's theory of concepts. A fundamental issue, she regarded it as the single most fundamental issue and the great unsolved problem in epistemology. And so she's talking about, in her monograph here, of which this is just a chapter, she's talking about concepts in general and their specific relation to the perceptual. What is the relationship between our abstractions, our generalizations, and the particular things that we observe? And so in order to develop that, she has to tell us how we form concepts from looking at, I see a bunch of blue objects, I see a bunch of round objects. How do I develop from that the concept blue, the concept round? And how do I go from there to even higher order abstractions from abstractions? And in the course of this, she has to cover several issues. Where do definitions first get generated? How are they used? How do they change over time? What is the role of definitions? Or how does this theory of concepts apply to every category of concept? Actions, attributes, like attributes like blue, like I said, or round, like I said, relationships. This is to the left of that or on top of that, or the actions of it. The ball was bouncing. All of those, so categories of concepts of action, attributes, entities, relationships. She has to go through every single kind of concept to show how they're connected to the perceptual level to have a thorough theory of concepts. This chapter focuses on maybe the most special kind of concepts there are, axiomatic concepts, the broadest concepts of all the concepts, and yet the concepts that are the most immediately and ever presently given in sense perception. And so to understand the importance of axiomatic concepts, we'll probably get into later, but these concepts, according to Ayn Rand, form the base of all future knowledge. If we can't be secure in our axioms, and that's what an axiom really is, it's a foundation, it's a base, it's the beginning. If we don't have that squared away, all of our other concepts must necessarily also be, to that degree, subjective, unknowable, inexact. So this is absolutely critical. It's critical to knowledge, and knowledge is absolutely critical to life.
Thank you. So, just to plunge into the discussion, could you tell us what is an axiomatic concept, and what is the difference between it and just an axiom?
Well, I challenge the question a little bit. An axiom is itself is, in a sense, an abstraction, the broadest of all possible abstractions, but it's a kind of conceptual knowledge. Axiom, but the content, you may be asking what is the difference between, in effect, the content of the axiom and an axiomatic concept. See, I perceive blue, right? I can just directly perceive blue, and from instances of blue, I can generate the concept blue. Axioms are the broadest of all concepts. They are present in every instance of perception. See, only blue things show up when I look and I see blue, but axioms are that which literally is present in its content, just like blueness is, So an axiom is a perceptual self-evidency in the same way that my perception of any particular patch of blue is a perceptual self-evidency. So if you mean what is the difference between the content of the axiom, that is a perceptual given. A perceptual given like blue or round is as I can perceive it. Only it's present at every single perception. Perception of red things, blue things, square things, round things. And so an axiom is the broadest of all concepts, and yet it is present in every single instance of perception. So it is directly given, and it forms the base of all subsequent knowledge. That's what an axiom is. The question is, what is the role of axiomatic concepts? Because they are a very special kind of concept. And we'll no doubt get into that later. But they serve, in effect, as the grounding, the integration, and the foundation for all subsequent knowledge. They're that important.
According to Rand, what are the first and primary axioms? And could you, and she says that explicitly, first and primary axioms. Could you also tell us a bit why she calls them first and primary?
Well, existence, identity, and consciousness are for Ayn Rand the three absolutely ground level base of all knowledge, precisely because they are present in every act of awareness, every perception of reality. As I say, I can see blue things, red things, square things, round things, but whatever I'm seeing, it exists, and I'm aware of it. There's an implicit premise behind everything. That is a blue object. That is a round object. That is to the left of that. That is a bouncing ball. Everything I perceive, literally everything I perceive, not only has that quality given to me in perception, right? I see it moving or blue or round or next to it, but everything, literally everything that I perceive exists. And there's a sort of underlying given perceptual reality of existence, identity, and consciousness in every instance of perception, every instance of awareness, literally every single one. That exists, and I'm aware of it. That exists, and I'm aware of it. So implicit in my saying that is a blue object is in fact, implicit in anything I know or say is an underlying implicit assertion. There is something of which I am aware. There is something of which I am aware. Oh, there is something of which I am aware. There is something of which I am aware. That's a given and a constant in each and every act of perception. That's why it's the first, because it's the broadest concept. And although it's not named initially, it goes on. Initially, it's an implicit premise that we have, but it's a given. And that given actually is the foundation on which all of our other concepts must be based.
So could you talk a bit more about the distinction between having these concepts implicitly versus explicitly? Like, why, like, do babies have the concept, or not babies, but infants have the notion of identity or consciousness or something like that?
From the first discriminated awareness a baby has immediately given all of the content of these axioms. Unlike, say, blue or round, which only happen in the field of vision where things happen to be blue or round, existence, identity, and consciousness are present in every instance of perception. So in order to separate out and retain, say, blue or round, I need those concepts to be named before I can get to the naming of even the underlying concepts of existence, identity, and consciousness. But I don't need to either, because they're present all the time. Because existence, identity, and consciousness are always there in every act of perception, that allows me to sort of take them for granted and to build all my knowledge on this implicit knowledge, this unnamed knowledge. And that's what we mean to say. When we're infants and children and teenagers developing our knowledge, it is this implicit knowledge that helps that we can build on for the rest of our knowledge, you see. But it's only as adults that we need to name them out loud, to explicitly identify, I see, when I called that object red, when I called that object round, when I called that object square, I was saying it existed and that I was aware of it. That it existed and that I was aware of it. And in every single instance of perception, it's there. So I don't need to name it. I'm aware of it. It's a constant awareness even before it's named. But it's an unnamed awareness. So we call it implicit knowledge. It's important as adults to make that explicit, to bring that out. Because it is exactly on these fundamental issues that philosophy has taken a wrong turn, a dangerously wrong turn, and has in effect screwed up the whole of modern philosophy. As Ayn Rand says, what these metaphysical axioms are underscorings of basic facts. And without that reminder, without that underscoring of that basic fact, it's easy to lose track, especially as I'm thinking about high abstractions. And that connection, the whole theme of Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, the connection between the abstract and the concrete is what this is all about, and what Ayn Rand is exactly trying to zero in on in her chapter on axiomatic concepts. Now, Ayn Rand has further discussion of axioms, say in John Galt's speech and so forth, in other writings of hers. In this context, she's talking about the distinction of axiomatic concepts and the role they play in the rest of the development of our conceptual knowledge.
So, moving a bit forward, she talks about existence and identity not being attributes, and she highlights attributes of existence, but basic facts of all facts. Could you explain what is it? And maybe would you think that she's addressing a more historical / philosophical problem with this assertion?
Is she solving a major problem in philosophy? You know, philosophers were for people who aren't familiar with it, there's a problem of substance in philosophy, right? What is this thing that we're talking about? This thingness of it. It's almost like an invisible pincushion on which its various attributes. It's red, it's square, it's a ball, it can bounce. So all my attributes are sort of attached to it, and a pincushion. What is this invisible pincushion? The identity of the thing, the existence of the thing. Well, that's not how Ayn Rand saw it at all. Existence isn't like a coat of paint on something. It's not some attribute that can be dispensed with. This is the way John Galt puts it. Existence is identity. To be is to be something in particular, to have attributes. Having those attributes, having those qualities, are the existence of it. It's not that existence is something over and above all the things that it is. Existence is identity. So don't be looking for some invisible pincushion of substance, philosophers. Existence is identity. It's not as though it's an attribute like red or square or to the left of is a relationship or an action, the way it bounces. No. It's none of those things. It's all of those things. It is those things. So in Ayn Rand's view, existence isn't just some attribute that things have. Everything I perceive, if I'm perceiving, exists. And its existence is its identity. There is nothing more to existence and identity but the qualities that we perceive.
And
the other unknown things that we'll later learn about it. But those qualities that we perceive is its existence.
But for instance, Saint Anselm's argument for God, if I recall it correctly, it's something like, well, God is something that has all attributes possible to in reality, but if it lacked the attribute of existence, it wouldn't be perfect. So, since it's perfect, then it must exist. It's taking existence as an attribute, and therefore it's proving God because of that.
That is a really brilliant connection and insight. You're absolutely right. The little minor modification. Yes, in Anselm's view, look, God is the thing for which no better thing can be conceived. It's the very best. It's the mostest. It's the bestest with the mostest, as it were. And for him, existence must be included in the bestest and the mostest. If something is going to be the best, then it's got to exist. And if God is the highest thing we can conceive of, by definition, notice he's defining, he's proving from a definition, he's not proving from an observation of reality, which is exactly the opposite of the objectivist approach, of course, but you're exactly right. He's treating existence, like all these subsequent philosophers did, like some invisible pincushion or some coat of paint that you have it. No, 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 no. Existence means nothing more than all the things that are true about the thing. It's red, it's round, it bounces, and it's a ball. And all of that is the existence. The substance of its existence is the sum of its attributes. No, 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 no.
Could you talk a bit more about what axioms are epistemically and metaphysically? She refers explicitly to epistemically being an abstraction and metaphysically an integration. Could you explain a bit more what she refers about that? What does that mean?
Well, metaphysically, existence is a fact, right? It either exists or it doesn't exist, right? Consciousness is a fact. I'm either aware of that or I'm not aware of that. It's an irreducible fact, in effect, that an axiomatic concept is naming. The epistemological role of this is to serve as an integrator of all the rest of our knowledge. Let's go up the chain of abstractions just to pick one example. I see the ball. It's round, it's blue, it's a ball. Oh, ball. It belongs to the category of toys, which belongs to the wider category of human-made objects, which belongs to a wider category, which belongs to a wider category. You know, blue is a color. Round is a shape, and I move up the chain of abstraction. Everything that has, I categorize everything with shape. I categorize everything with color. So I now have broader abstractions, shape and color. Now, what is the very broadest of all possible abstractions? Existence, identity, consciousness. They are inescapable because they're present in every single act of awareness. We can't get under them. We can't get around them. They can't be analyzed or broken into other facts. And yet they serve as the ground floor for all the rest of my knowledge. Being the base of my knowledge, they are both the highest abstraction and the first approach that allows me to say, yeah, that thing that exists that I'm aware of is blue and round and a ball and a man, and all the way up the chain of abstraction. So if we're going to, Ayn Rand believed that the only way to achieve certainty and confidence in our knowledge is through total comprehensive integration. We've got to integrate the whole of our knowledge into a consistent unity. And in this function, axioms serve a vital and, in fact, indispensable role. Absent these broadest abstractions, absent identifying that which is present in each and every instance of perception, is necessary to frame and ground and organize and integrate the whole of my knowledge.
Now, she moves a bit forward, and I try to not bring my confusions to these discussions because sometimes
oh no, you should, Alon.
I mean,
your confusion
at the end sometimes
shared by dozens of people out there listening.
I mean, I try to bring them at the end because sometimes I realize that I drift apart if I bring my own confusions, and sometimes I lose the thread of the discussions. But I think right now it's important to bring this over because it's one of the big points that she's making. And she talks about concept formation having very specific units. And I understand what units she refers to. But she also explains that there is a measurement of time as being the metaphysical fact being retained. Could you explain what she means by that? And could you also explain what units are the ones that are being retained?
Well, a unit is something as regarded as a member of a larger group. So I say a unit of the concept ball is that and that and that and that. All those balls that I see, a baseball, a basketball, a football. And so the units are those balls considered as members of the wider generalization ball. But if you think about it for a second, there's something special about axioms. The units are everything. The units of existence and identity, for example, are everything that I perceive, everything that exists. And to exist is to be something. So for me to be able to say this exists and that as opposed to not existing, or if I say it's this versus that, and that's all we're identifying with existence identity. We're simply distinguishing exists from that which doesn't exist, this thing versus that thing, right? These are, in effect, the widest abstractions that we can possibly make, if that if that makes sense. Now, time is only graspable conceptually. Time is itself a concept. Time is itself an abstraction away from what we're seeing. But sensations themselves are immediate, and they're only in the moment. There's this moment of that moment, and things change over time. The same object can turn from a leaf in autumn, can go from green to yellow to orange, right? And so I say, oh, the color is changing over, I get the abstraction, time. But there's something again here that's important. The unification of existence and identity over time can only be achieved at the conceptual level. Sure, in each instance, discrete instance of perception, existence, identity, consciousness, there's something of which I'm aware. Here, here, here. But to put that together, that perception of existence, in fact, all my perceptions of existence into the single concept of existence, I'm abstracting away from the time element. It's always there in every perception. It's a constant. That's what Ayn Rand means. We're abstracting the abstraction that is the axiomatic concept is our conceptual awareness of something that's always there in perception anytime, every single time and over time. But to understand that it's present over time is an achievement of the conceptual mind, you see, even if all the content of existence is given in each and every instance of perception. My subsequent knowledge of existence doesn't add one little bit to the idea of existence. I know everything there is to know about existence from one perception. And yet the abstraction of existence as an axiom requires, my conceptual faculty clicking in, but there's nothing, existence is so broad a concept, so ever present, right? That, well, in effect, all I'm doing is abstracting away the concept time. Existence always is.
But what's about consciousness? Because I know that when I die or before I was born, my consciousness didn't exist yet. And if you abstract time from that, wouldn't you take away consciousness away from it as well?
Not at all. Time can exist apart from see, the reference to existence and identity include consciousness. Consciousness is an existing thing, and it's a specific thing. What Ayn Rand is saying when consciousness is an axiom, when she's saying that, she's saying no instance of your awareness is anything other than an instance of awareness. You can't get under that. I can infer the future beyond my death. I can infer the past before my birth, but those are instances of my present awareness. Even that, even my ideas of past and future are ideas in my head. You cannot get underneath or around or behind consciousness. Consciousness is an axiomatic thing. And even your awareness of, your post-mortem future and your pre-birth past of humanity, say, all that is simply another state of your consciousness. If we would discover something about brains and how brains produce consciousness, and we have a lot to learn about that still, although we're learning, it wouldn't change one little bit. Our knowledge of brain science is itself just a form of consciousness. Even just giving me the physiological causes of consciousness doesn't, in effect, add to the axiom of consciousness. It depends on the axiom of consciousness. If the axiom of existence and the axiom of consciousness were not true, we couldn't engage in brain science. You see, explaining consciousness even won't do it. So you see, all this talk about consciousness that we can do is true because consciousness is a discrete fact of reality. On the other hand, it's a discrete fact of reality that is always part of my awareness and always part of my knowledge of anything, including consciousness.
Or would you put it in the, like, in this sense, like, if you take a look at consciousness as an existent, then my question is only reinforcing the whole idea of taking away the concept, the notion of time away from. Is it the same example as a leaf? You There's no consciousness, then you have the consciousness, and then it fades away.
You
Am I correct?
you can conceptually look at consciousness that way, and our conceptual analysis of consciousness can, like I say, can involve all kinds of discrete understanding. I mean, just as our awareness of existence and identity can involve, Newton's laws of mechanics, so our awareness of psychology, of consciousness, can include psychology and, more basically, epistemology itself. I can tell you all kinds of things about consciousness, understanding that it is an existent, it has identity. And filling out the what that identity of consciousness is really all you're doing. However, I'm still not getting underneath the concept of consciousness in the sense that consciousness isn't an axiom. Consciousness is an axiom that informs all of that knowledge, including my knowledge about consciousness.
Um, can I bring a bit of history of philosophy? I'm by no means an expert, but my understanding is that the concept of consciousness started to be developed with Augustine in the 4th century. And isn't he also very keen on the idea of time? Do you think that has something to do? Well, like, he's thinking about these two things.
What a fascinating question that is. You're right. Augustine of Hippo was probably the first philosopher to identify consciousness as such, as a concept. And it was the development of a lot of Greek thinking that had gone on before. He was heavily influenced by Platonism and Neoplatonism and the developments in classical philosophy. But the ancient Greeks, had distinctions, nous, the active intellect, and so forth. You had different, they didn't understand consciousness as a unified thing, and that's a controversial thing by itself. I don't want the argument to hinge on that. But yeah, there is a connection between understanding these axioms over time, and understanding them to be ever-present axioms, but I don't think Augustine understood the concept of axiom. Now, when you go further in time, for example, and you've got Kant saying that time and space, logic, entity, causality, those are just features of the human mind. They're not features of reality. As an answer, in effect, to poor David Hume, who said, look, all I have is my immediate sense perception, and I can't tell you what causality is, entity is, what all these things, these abstract, he can't get to an abstraction from all these discrete sensations. It is exactly why Ayn Rand needed to give us this introduction to objectivist epistemology, to tell us how concepts are connected to reality, how these abstractions are connected to sense perception. Exactly. That is the answer to these guys.
Actually, my next question was going to be related to that, in the sense of, if I remember correctly again, my understanding is that Hume has this idea of, how do I know that the sun is going to come up tomorrow? And then Kant comes up with a whole explanation about why. And he, if I remember correctly again, he comes up with this idea of the fundamental unit of a perception, which basically is like some sort of glue that every human being has, that allows people to see the sun the next day. Do you think that Rand is answering the same need,
Yes.
but from the exact opposite?
Exactly the opposite. Exactly.
Could you explain why and how?
Well, for Kant, he believed that the identity of consciousness was just like, well, really, actually, Aristotle as wonderful and important as Aristotle is, he got us started off on the wrong foot. He implied more than once that if consciousness did have a specific identity, that would be a disqualifying feature to it. And when modern philosophy began with Descartes, and all the way through Hume, Hegel, and all the way to Kant, and all the way to the present, it got them started off on a wrong footing precisely because of a misunderstanding of axioms. For Descartes, he had to infer, for example, the existence of a world apart from consciousness. He did not understand the relationship between these axioms or the nature of existence and identity as axioms, as being axiomatic in the sense of the same sense as he was only left with consciousness. But of course, if it's just consciousness, that's not going to help you at all. And so we get off onto the exact wrong footing because of a misunderstanding. As Ayn Rand puts it so wonderfully in this essay on axiomatic concepts, they are these little reminders, these constant reminders of what really does ground our knowledge, what we really are seeing about it. And without those constant reminders, without being able to name our axioms explicitly, we are subject to precisely the kind of errors that Descartes made and got modern philosophy off on such a terribly wrong footing. But you're right, in effect, the idea that and Descartes had it, the father of rationalism, Locke had it, the father of empiricism, right? This veil of perception. Consciousness is a disqualifying feature. Kant goes so far as to actually say, well, yeah, since we can't know reality, all this stuff, all these concepts are really features of our mind. Time, space, logic, entity, causality, that's the way we have to see things. It's not something about reality, they're just features of our mind, because he's trapped, in effect, by the veil of perception, and he just accepts it. And how does that happen? A failure to understand the role of axioms. And again, if all these philosophers from Descartes to Kant had understood the role of axioms and the relationship between, say, existence and consciousness, they would never have gotten off on the wrong footing. It's really that simple. When we're infants, just to give an example, and this is a great example that Dr. Peikoff uses, we see some unpleasant reality as babies. And we all, probably, I can even remember doing it, covering my eyes or closing my eyes against some unpleasant reality. No, mommy, I don't want to eat my spinach. And the spinach spoon is coming towards me. No! I cover my eyes against the unpleasant reality, right? Or I drop my toy. Oh, I can't pick it up. Oh, I close my eyes against the consequences. The dog just took it or something. We learn that just by closing our eyes, the world doesn't go away. The unpleasant reality doesn't go away simply because I avoided looking at it, considering it, or knowing it. No, my consciousness must conform to existence. And every time I make a mistake, I'm brutally reminded that my consciousness must conform to existence and not the other way about. Understanding the relationship, say, between the axiom of existence and the axiom of consciousness is absolutely vital. Not understanding what Ayn Rand called the primacy of existence, which can only be understood by an appreciation of the axioms and how they work, you're doomed. You're never going to get to knowledge of the real world, confident knowledge that we can securely build upon. It's that important.
I have another technical question. I've already asked you about units, which she considers that something important about how to conceptualize concepts. But there's also something that she calls the CCD. And she says that the conceptual common denominator. Could you explain? And she says that axiomatic concepts do not have a CCD. Why does she think that? And do you think, and in what sense is that relevant?
In her theory, this is just a chapter, as I say, in her theory of concepts. And her theory of concepts is that our discrete concepts what we're doing is at the base level, what we're doing is we are identifying the differences and similarities that we see between percepts. And only between seeing, oh, that's blue, that's red, but that's like that. It's blue too. Can we get, oh, the concept blue? And so what we need for each of our concepts is something to distinguish it from all the others. To blue from things that aren't color, blue from red, pink, green, right? And so each concept needs its own distinction, right? The thing that unifies that everything that's integrated under that concept, but makes it different from everything else, but distinguishes it from everything else. Once we've reached the broadest level of abstraction, once we've reached the floor of knowledge, there is nothing to distinguish existence from. Only non-existence, which is literally nothing. There is nothing to distinguish consciousness from. Nothing. No state of awareness that I can distinguish consciousness from. No piece of my knowledge, no single item of my knowledge can be divorced from this wider concept. There's nothing to distinguish any state of consciousness from consciousness itself. There is nothing to distinguish an existent in reality from existence itself. Well, I could distinguish balls and blue things and red things and round things and square things. What I cannot do is find you the thing that exists, all things that exist have in common as opposed to all things that don't exist have in common, other than the raw fact this is as opposed to not being. This is that. This is this as opposed to being that, the law of identity. And it is something of which I am aware, the axiom of consciousness.
You mentioned the idea that there can be there cannot be something like non-existence, and I'm quoting the book. I'm becoming the devil's advocate right now. But what about when you, I don't know, burn some paper and you say there's no paper anymore? There's a non-existence of the paper, or when you take away something from a box and you said it's empty, there's nothing over there. Isn't that non-existence?
Non-existence only has meaning within such contexts of things that did exist, could exist, would have existed, the box could have had, would have had, did have. In other words, non-existence is literally nothing. It's not as though existence is the absence of nothing. Nothing is the absence of existence. It's the other way around. We can only get to nothing by reference to what is. So nothing wouldn't even be a concept but for something, 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 something. Oh, now the box is empty. Now the object is burned. So it's only because you had the object that burned that you can now say, ah, there's nothing left of the paper, right? It is not, if it was a world filled with nothing, there'd be nothing to know. There'd be no subject matter. If things weren't what they were, there'd be nothing to identify. If identity didn't exist, there'd be nothing to know. If I wasn't conscious, if I didn't have the capacity for consciousness, again, I couldn't know. There'd be nothing to know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Can you also relate
one
it
of the
to
great error? Maybe I should follow that up.
Yeah.
Ayn Rand makes a point right here that one of the great errors at the end of this essay, that one of the great errors in philosophy is called the reification of zero. You know, in mathematics, zero is really a placeholder. It's a convenience for our number and measuring system, right? Like negative numbers, in effect. They can have meaning, but only in a specific context, these negative numbers. So it's very easy to reify nothing as a thing, but that is one of the great, grave errors of philosophy, again, that Ayn Rand is cutting off at the pass here. And that's one of the functions, by the way, that axioms serve. Existence is what exists, and only existence exists, but all of existence exists.
And she talks about the existentialist movement, and she has a couple quotes of Sartre and Heidegger saying basically that nothingness has precedence over existence. And could you explain? She says that there is a reason why they do that, and she quotes exactly Heidegger. She gives the exact quote of Heidegger. Why do you think that these philosophers like to see the presence of nothingness?
Well, ultimately, it's the assault on knowledge itself. And that's really the function of axioms. We're getting right to the function of axioms without the underscoring, and that's what they are. When we get to the adult age where we can say, where we can identify existence, identity, and consciousness in explicit terms out loud, fully putting the cap on that concept that has only been implicit for all this time, what it serves is to protect me precisely against that kind of nonsense, the reification of zero. So you ask yourself the same question from the other standpoint. Then why are they doing this? To undermine human knowledge, to undermine human confidence. The ultimate motive here is the assault on the conceptual faculty. To assault the conceptual faculty is the main goal of contemporary philosophy, to divide the world of perception and all the manifold things that we perceive in the reality that we're walking around in, and our abstractions, our generalizations, our concepts about them. And it is this level, the conceptual level of awareness, that philosophy has been hell-bent on undermining. So you want to know what their motive is? To undermine the conceptual faculty. And the most powerful way of undermining the conceptual faculty is to go right at the root and say that the broadest concepts, existence, identity, and consciousness, are arbitrary, meaningless, or are just the opposite. Nothing is what's important, not existence. We don't start with existence exists, we start with nothing nothings, which some of those start out as. So yeah, it's to undermine the conceptual level of consciousness as such.
Just for reference, the quote that she brings is Heidegger's, and it goes like this, quote, "Genuine utterances about nothing must always remain unusual. It cannot be made common. It dissolves when it's placed in the cheap acids of mere logical acumen." Unquote.
See, that's it. Boy, doesn't that confess everything. Mere logic. Logic is life and death. Logic is instrumental to my acquiring new knowledge. Logic is how I validate my knowledge. It's a mere logic. Yeah, the mere level of conceptual understanding. That is all of our science, all of our ethics, all of our knowledge beyond immediate sense perception. That is what he's after and undermining.
So we're right at the end, and I think this is one of my favorite chapters in the book, and probably one of my favorite writings about her. And it basically addresses a lot of what people encounter, or one of the questions that people encounter when they start studying Rand. Like, yes, A is A, but what does that mean? And here, what does that mean?
Right. Aristotle had this wonderful defense of the law of non-contradiction, which inspires so much of the Aristotelian approach to this topic, and inspired a good deal of Ayn Rand's approach to this topic, very much so. Aristotle would say, of course a man believes in the law of non-contradiction, and he believes it in everything that he says. All he has to do is utter one word: horse, man. He's already committed to the law of non-contradiction, whether he knows it or not. And so Aristotle has this amazing defense that even those who would deny the law of non-contradiction must accept it, right? How are they going to prove to me that the law of non-contradiction is false? With logic? Well, they're depending on the very thing, the law of non-contradiction, that they're trying to assault in order to assault it. And that's a giant stolen concept, of course. So yeah, Ayn Rand had a particular approach to metaphysical argumentation that was, in a sense, inspired by Aristotle. But for her, it backs out to even more basic facts: existence and identity. Identity is, in effect, the fact that Aristotle, non-contradiction is just another way of looking at the law of identity, as far as Ayn Rand could see. And medievals had observed that as well. But you see, medievals took it out of context, as like you pointed out with Anselm. They treated logic as something apart from reality, something that could impose itself, in effect, on reality from this other dimension. That's not how Ayn Rand saw it. Existence, identity, and consciousness are the most basic facts that underlie all other facts and form the basis of all of our knowledge. And so in this sense, I can't prove to you the fact of existence. That would be a circular argument. Just, right? Just as much as Aristotle shows that you can't refute the law of non-contradiction without self-contradiction, the best we can do is show, I can't prove it, that would be a circular argument. The best I can prove is that it is an axiom, is that it is the base of knowledge, and that even people who attempt to deny them must begin by accepting and agreeing with them. They have to accept the truth of the axiom even in order to get their attack on the axiom off the ground. They have this built-in defense, as Dr. Peikoff puts it. Any attempt to deny existence must assume the fact of existence. Any attempt to deny the law of identity must assume the law of identity. Any attempt to refute the axiom of consciousness must assume the axiom of consciousness. He has, in Objectivism and Philosophy of Ayn Rand, he's a wonderful little dialogue on this very point, where someone comes up and says, well, wait a minute, none of these axioms are true. They're all arbitrary. After all, people disagree about axioms, don't they? And Peikoff says the best way to approach the person is to just go with them. Pretend the axioms don't exist for a minute. I disagree with you, sir. People don't disagree about everything. No, they don't disagree. In fact, they agree about everything because there's nothing to disagree about. There's no subject matter. If nothing existed, there could be no disagreement. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course, things exist, right? Still, what does it matter that people disagree? Contradictions can exist. The mere fact that he says axioms are one thing and this guy says they're the opposite, there's no problem there. Well, no, what are you talking about? A can't be A at the same time and in the same respect. Of course, a disagreement is important and matters and relates to the, well, that's identity. Check, check. Oh, and finally, I say, no, people don't disagree. They're not conscious. They don't have any ideas, right or wrong. How could they possibly disagree if they're not conscious? Oh, well, obviously, you know everyone's conscious. Of course people are conscious. No, see, boom, boom, boom. His whole attack on the axioms, because these are the axioms, right, builds in a defense. They have a built-in defense. You can't you can't even get your argument off the ground to assault these things without assuming their truth. Any more than I could prove their existence by some prior knowledge. Proof is the derivation of new knowledge from old, the validation of some new piece of knowledge. But there's no prior knowledge to our knowledge of existence. It's present in every instance of perception. Existence is inescapable. Now, what have I done in showing that it's inescapable? Have I proven the axioms? No. All I've done is prove to you that they are axioms, that they must lie at the base of all knowledge and be the implicit assumptions of all subsequent knowledge. I think I lost your audio there, Alejandro.
Sorry, that was my mistake. Sorry, but I was thanking you and saying that that's one of the most one of the things that I remember the most of Popper. Great.
Well, you know, with all axiomatic knowledge, you know, the directly observable, because Ayn Rand regards all the entire realm of observation, of sense perception, in effect as axiomatic. That is the base of all knowledge from which we develop all concepts, blue, round, ball, etc., all the way up to existence, all the way up to existence. They are universals and inescapable parts of our knowledge. They are non-arbitrary. Their validation is in their immediate observation, in the fact that they are constantly and directly observed. Our argument about, you know, how you can't refute them without self-contradiction, nor could you attempt to prove them in a non-circular way, only establishes that they are axioms. And this would be true, say, of free will, another piece of axiomatic knowledge. Our direct awareness of free will is simply our internal experience that I make choices, the internal experience that thinking takes effort. I have to exert a positive effort to engage in a purposeful process of cognition. That is my validation for free will, the direct observation of something immediately given in observation. The self-defense mechanism is sort of the backstop, showing that, yeah, any attempt to refute what I see all the time with my own lion eyes, I guess, is true because you can't even refute it. But the ultimate validation for any item of axiomatic knowledge is in effect, the direct awareness, the direct observation of it, and the omnipresence of that, which makes it an axiom, which makes it a fundamental.
Thank you very much, James.
Sure.
I think we've covered it all. Covered it all. Do you think that we missed something? Something that you would like to for us to talk about this discussion?
Well, I touched on only a couple of issues in Rand's metaphysics, and in fact, this essay on axiomatic concepts is mostly just covering the topic from the standpoint of what axioms are as concepts, the special nature of axioms as concepts. And as I say, there's a broader discussion in Ayn Rand's writings of metaphysics, the topic that covers axiomatic knowledge, in effect. And I would direct people to John Galt's speech. I would direct people to Ayn Rand's essay, The Metaphysical versus the Man-Made. That's an important issue in metaphysics. Causality is an important issue in metaphysics. How as infants our axiomatic knowledge develops chronologically and logically is an important issue. And so for all that, I would also urge you to read Dr. Leonard Peikoff's monumental treatise, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, which covers all of these issues in great detail. And urge people to read the whole of Ayn Rand's Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, where they'll get a fuller discussion of axioms, what they are, and their role in human life.
Thank you very much, James, and I certainly approve that message.
Well, thank you.
Well, let me thank Bonnie for the super chat. Thank you very much. And if you like these discussions, I don't think that in many or any other places they're having discussions about axiomatic concepts on YouTube. Please subscribe. Also like this video, click the bell, and leave a comment.
Please do. Yeah. I'd love to hear you. If you like what we say, if you don't like what I'm saying, if you disagree with Ayn Rand, if you disagree with me, please leave a comment. And do consider becoming a paid subscriber to Ayn Rand Center UK. The additional perks you get, apart from these essay discussions and so forth that we do, are numerous and of high value. We do workshops that get into philosophical issues in much greater detail than these short discussions can do. So please consider becoming a paid member of Ayn Rand Center UK if you enjoy this kind of content.
Thank you very much, James.
Thank you. Take care.